It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast. We are presented, of course, by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years, back in the 2000s, which sounds like a long time ago now. You can check me out on social. Appreciate those of you do. Every platform, at Ross Tucker NFL. Even better, at Ross Tucker Pod, where we post the highlight clips of this show, all of our shows. Highly recommend it. You can also watch this show, full episode, or see the highlight clips of this show and the others, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. The star of the show is my man, Joe Dolan, fellow Eastern PA loudmouth like me. Here's what you like here's what we do in Eastern PA, okay? We like food, we like football, we like talking about food and football. Like, we're not real complicated people. Okay, you can check him out on social media at FG_Dolan. Does a terrific job for fantasypoints.com. You can always use that code 23FEAST over there. Maybe you want to do some DFS stuff towards the end of the season. Maybe you're out of your fantasy playoffs, so you're going in more the DraftKings DFS route. That's possible. We got people starting playoffs this week, Joe. We got no buys, so we got to dive into it, man. You ready to roll?
Oh yeah, Ross. Let's get going. There's unfortunately we got some major quarterback injuries again, so we've got a lot of stuff that needs to be talked about, and maybe some teams that are just completely off the fantasy radar here as we go forward.
By the way, did you know that I accidentally last week missed the Vikings Raiders game? We did not talk about it, and it finished 3-0.
That was prescient.
That might
Ross.
have been our fault, Joe.
That was prescient. Well, you know what? Like that's kind of every piece of advice I would have given from that game would have been wrong. So I'm glad you missed it.
let's do Chargers Raiders.
Okay.
Tomorrow night, Easton Stick. Unbelievable. His last name, Stick, is like a bat. Easton Bat, like, love it. And he's going against, I guess it'll be Aiden O'Connell Wednesday morning. Last I checked, Antonio Pierce said he was still considering it.
Yeah, so this is going to be a disaster of a Thursday night football game, let's be honest. Now, Easton Stick, Ross, I don't know if I never played hockey, I can't skate. But Easton Stick, I think the existence of Easton Stick in the NFL presumes the existence of an NHL player named Wilson Pigskin. So that guy's going to be coming down the pipe at some point in the NHL. Keep an eye out for him. But Easton Stick, look, he's not Justin Herbert. And as much as I think we're frustrated by Justin Herbert and the lack of production or the lack of winning, depending on whichever metric you want to follow, I think everybody can acknowledge that Justin Herbert being down for the Chargers is bad for the entire Charger offense. Here is the good thing for Easton Stick. If you have Keenan Allen for fantasy, Easton Stick targeted Keenan Allen on nearly 40% of his throws last week, 37.5 to be exact. Ahead of Austin Eckler, who was down at 20%, and Gerald Everett down at 17%. So Keenan Allen got peppered with targets. Keenan Allen, of course, is dealing with a heel injury. On the flip side, for the Las Vegas Raiders, Josh Jacobs is dealing with a quad injury. We have a short week here for Josh Jacobs. If Josh Jacobs can't go, it's worth noting that Amir Abdullah outsnapped Zamir White last week. By the way, when I'm talking about these guys, I'm talking about desperation plays here. The Raiders are coming off a game in which they scored 0 points. So you're not exactly pining for one of these Raider running backs. But if they have a positive game script, it might be Zamir White getting more targets. The Raiders are 3-point favorites against Easton Stick and the hapless and hopeless LA Chargers.
All right, so my high-price guy, I'll go with Keenan Allen for the reasons you just mentioned, Joe. He's 8,200 on DraftKings. And for my value, should I go Zamir White or Abdullah? I don't think Jacob's going to play.
Yeah, so I would say just based on projected, go Amir Abdullah. I just think he's better than Zamir White. I think he's better than him, but
Amir Abdullah. So I got Keenan Allen and Amir Abdullah this week. Saturday at 1 o'clock, Joe, I will be there. It's Nick Mullins against Jake Browning, Vikings, Bengals. Joe, I think Jake Browning's kind of good.
Yeah, he's been doing his job right, but this is a really good stat that our guy Scott Barrett pointed out in one of his articles this week up at fantasypoints.com. 20% of Jake Browning's passing production from fantasy has come on balls thrown behind the line of scrimmage. So pass catchers, either could be two things. Zach Taylor's doing a great job designing the screen game, or the players in the screen game are doing great things for Jake Browning. But Browning has absolutely done a solid job. He can run around a little bit. He scored a rushing touchdown. So he's clearly on the fantasy radar. The problem is facing this Brian Flores defense is going to be problematic, I think, for Jake Browning this week. It's a very difficult defense to play as a young quarterback, as you saw for Aiden O'Connell last week. There's one thing I want to point out about the Bengals. I've been saying that this week. Look, the Bengals need to save some money. I'm sure they're going to try to keep T. Higgins. They want to try. I'm not saying they will, just saying they want to try. They can cut $3 million this offseason, save $3 million if they get rid of Joe Mixon. Chase Brown's come on the last couple of weeks, and if you're in a keeper league and he's out there on the waiver wire, in Dynasty, he's rostered. I understand that. But say you're in a league that has 4, 5, 6 keepers, and you're like, I'm out of it, or I'm in it, but I'm not sure who I'm going to be keeping next year. Go pick up Chase Brown if he's out there, because I think there is a chance that we're talking about Chase Brown in 2024 the way we talked about Rachaad White this offseason. A guy who was behind a veteran for most of the season, the veteran moves on, and then the team decides not to spend up at running back, and then all of a sudden this guy's getting drafted in the top 70 picks in fantasy drafts. Go get Chase Brown if he's out there. If you're in a keeper league, I think there's a chance we're talking about him the way we talked about Rachaad White this offseason, and Rachaad White is currently a top 5 fantasy running back in total points.
I think I saw where Chase Brown on that screen was the second fastest GPS time.
He had some serious explosion
behind DK Metcalf. Yeah. He was rolling. What about the Vikings on offense with Nick Mullins, Joe?
Looks like they could have Justin Jefferson. Fortunately, that hospital ball that literally put him in the hospital doesn't seem to have affected or given him serious internal injuries. We'll see about that. That would definitely help Nick Mullins. He came in and he distributed the ball, and he played a lot calmer than Josh Dobbs played. He targeted TJ Hawkinson on 31% of his throws, but of course, Justin Jefferson wasn't out there. Nonetheless, I think if Nick Mullins is the quarterback for the Vikings, I feel like you could trust Jefferson if he plays. Obviously, you trust Hawkinson as a tight end 1. Other than that, we have to watch the Alexander Mattison ankle injury, because if he doesn't play, Ty Chandler is solidly on the RB2 radar.
Saturday at 4:30. Another quarterback palooza. Mitchell Trubisky against Gardner Minshew. Steelers, Colts, Joe.
Well, the Steelers, I guess Mike Tomlin said he's gone out and he's said Mason Rudolph is going to get opportunities in practice this week, though he's not going to start. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a short leash for Mitchell Trubisky in this game. Trubisky, though, here's part of the problems. Mitchell Trubisky, in the games he's played this year, is spreading the ball around a lot. He doesn't have a single receiver at even an 18% target share, which is like really affecting the upside of Deontay Johnson and George Pickens and all the receivers there for the Steelers, who clearly are struggling to get going offensively. The running backs were not good in last week's game. I just think it's an offense that is downgraded across the board with Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback. We'll see. If Trubisky struggles, I wouldn't be shocked if we see Mason Rudolph in this game against the Colts.
What about the Colts, Joe?
So the problem for the Colts here, and look, I said it on last week's show, and I'll say it again. If I know Zach Moss is getting 90% of the work, in the backfield, I'm going to rank him highly. But he's been terribly inefficient the last 2 weeks. He's had 10 opportunities inside the 10-yard line and hasn't scored a touchdown. And he had a touchdown come off the board due to a penalty last week. So it's been rough going for Zach Moss. I have a really hard time sitting him if Jonathan Taylor doesn't play this week, if only because of the volume and the fact that the Colts are 2.5-point favorites in this game. But I understand the frustration with his lack of production, despite the fact that he's getting every opportunity to produce. So that I understand. That being said, Michael Pittman, he gets shadowed every week. I think he'll get shadowed this week by Joey Porter. Last week against Chidobe Awuzie, 8 catches for 95 yards for Pittman. Of course, Gardner Minshew's 9 starts. Pittman is averaging 11 targets per game. He's the wide receiver 7, essentially, in fantasy points per game. The guy is just producing at a high level. I expect that to continue this week.
Saturday night, it's the Broncos at the Lions, Joe.
Yeah, 2 teams who actually have their starting quarterbacks. Can you believe this? This is where we're at. We are talking about the 4th game of the week. And it's the first game in which either team has its starting quarterback from this season, from week 1. Not both teams. This game, it's the first one either team has their starting quarterback. It's a pretty pivotal game because Jared Goff struggled last week against the Bears. For the second time this year, he struggled this week against the Bears. The one thing I will say about Detroit, and I'm not breaking any ground here, the Lions are going to have to try to run the football. While Vance Joseph and the Broncos have really settled down their defense that gave up 70 to the Dolphins all those weeks ago, the run defense has still surrendered the league's most non-scramble rush yards. The Lions have some injuries on the offensive line, but they're still running the ball well. The Broncos even allowed the Chargers' brutal run game to show some life last week. Over the last 5 weeks, running backs are averaging 3 schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game above average as runners alone against the Broncos defense, which is 6th most in the NFL. Both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery should be considered top 16 running back options this week. On the other hand, Amon-Ra St. Brown had his first sub-10 fantasy point game of the year in DraftKings fantasy points last week. The Broncos have been really good against opposing slot receivers. You have to play Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have to suck it up. But his 2 worst games of the season have come in the last 2 weeks.
Broncos, Joe?
So I have made a comparison. And I want you to take it with open eyes and open heart, Ross. Go to Pro Football Reference and search Jerry Jeudy statistics. And then I want you to go to Pro Football Reference or StatHead and compare those to Nelson Aguilar's on his career. Tell me what is the difference between these 2 players, production-wise. Tell me. Because as somebody who loved Jerry Jeudy coming out, and I've loved Jerry Jeudy for fantasy, there is no discernible difference. Honestly, I'm not even sure there's a difference in their on-field game between Jerry Jeudy and Nelson Aguilar. Jerry Jeudy's dropping passes. He has bad awareness in the end zone. Should have been an easy touchdown. He hasn't had a top 25 wide receiver week all season for fantasy points. Nelson Aguilar had a good season the year the Eagles went to the Super Bowl. Jerry Jeudy had a good season last year. Jerry Jeudy's rookie season, he had a year where he was really catching deep balls and not a whole lot else. Nelson Aguilar had that year when he was with the Raiders a couple of years ago. I'm telling you. Go look it up and tell me the difference between Jerry Jeudy and Nelson Aguilar. I'm out on Jerry Jeudy next year. I'm done with the guy. There's just something that is not clicking. There is something. I'm not saying. Look, Nelson Aguilar has been in the league now. This is his 9th season, I think, in the NFL. So Nelson Aguilar's had a long, productive, and lucrative career. I'm not saying Jerry Jeudy's not going to have that, but when it comes to fantasy football, that is the player we're looking at right now.
I'm looking right now on my Game Time app at the tickets for the game I'll be at, Vikings Bengals. Cheapest ticket right now, Section 313, row 31, $67. So if you can get there and get down to the front row before the game, I could potentially say hi, which would be cool. You can see the view from your seat before you buy it, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They got the all-in prices up front. You buy the ticket in seconds with 2 taps and the game time guarantee, which means you always get the best price. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code FEAST for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So again, create an account, redeem code FEAST for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Joe, let's move on to Sunday football. Falcons, Panthers.
Let's just write off the Carolina Panthers, Ross. We have, by the glory of television, we have a big wrap it up sign at a hard out here. And when 32 teams are playing, I think we have to wrap it up on some teams. The Panthers are a disaster. Chuba Hubbard, if you need a running back who's going to get carries in a game that could be decently competitive. I mean, let me look at the line here. We have Atlanta favored by 3 on the road, so at least it's going to be decently competitive if you need Chuba Hubbard. Other than that, I'm done with Carolina. Just a disaster.
What about your boy Drake London, though?
Oh, he had a huge game last week, and Tampa Bay has a pass funnel defense. Carolina's defense, I think, is a little bit better than maybe it's given credit for because of how disastrous the offense is. J.C. Horn is back, so Drake London could have a tougher matchup here. I'm saying, I think you have to play Drake London, but how about this key stat? Last week's game was at home, 89 yards per game at home, 35 on the road for Drake London. And this game is on the road. So that's a pretty wide split. I still think you have to play him, and I think you have to play Bijan Robinson. Kyle Pitts got in the end zone last week. He's still not getting enough targets for me to trust him on a week-to-week basis.
I'm excited to talk to you about this next game. The Bears at the Browns. They're both kind of gotten it going offensively a little bit, Joe.
How about old Joe Flacco, man? There's a lot of wild quarterback stories this year. Obviously, the injuries, the roller coaster of Josh Dobbs, who's been benched again. And then Joe Flacco comes in and plays arguably the 2 best games that we've seen a Browns quarterback play all year. Unbelievable. And he is rightfully named the starting quarterback for this team for the rest of the year. And look, Joe Flacco is going to deliver the ball to Amari Cooper. He's going to deliver the ball to David Njoku. I know Elijah Moore's kind of his boy. That didn't work out last week. But Joe Flacco delivers the ball to his receivers, and that is all we can ask for in this bloodbath of a season at the quarterback position. Love what Joe Flacco has been doing. This Bear defense has been better than maybe you anticipated, but I just adore what Joe Flacco has been doing, and I think he is a viable streamer for the next 2 weeks. Here's the problem with Joe Flacco if you picked him up. Say you needed to replace Justin Herbert. If you pick Joe Flacco up, they play the Jets in Week 17. So you might want to keep an eye on that schedule, maybe have a backup plan in place because that Jet defense is for real, as you well know, Ross. And Joe Flacco is going to have a tough matchup in Week 17 if you get to that point with Joe Flacco. Also keep an eye on the status of Jerome Ford, who has a hand injury. X-rays were negative for Jerome Ford, so there seems to be a good chance he goes this week.
And the Bears, Joe?
Well, Justin Fields is playing a lot better. Justin Fields gets the ball to DJ Moore. Justin Fields is a slam. I know the Browns defense is good, but given the state of the quarterback position right now, I don't see how you can justify sitting Justin Fields. The Bears are 3.5-point underdogs in this game, which is going to make their backfield interesting. Deontay Foreman, in a positive game script last week, basically dominated the backfield. Is Rashawn Johnson going to get more work as the pass catcher, pass protector in the event they're playing from behind as 3.5-point underdogs this week? That's the big question I have for the Chicago Bears.
If you're feeling good about your fantasy draft picks but not sure what to eat, make it easy on yourself. Order in on DoorDash. Now you can root for your squad while your food and drinks are on the way. That means burgers, chips, dip, soda, pizza, wings, so much more delivered straight to your door. Joe, you got to wash it down with something. You know my favorite, Labatt Blue Light. Delicious. Best tasting light beer ever. Live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. The Bucs and the Pack. Battle of the Bays, Joe.
Yeah, so the Packers with just a horrendous loss. And I know Tommy DeVito's the belle of the ball right now, but the Packers had a horrendous loss. Here is the problem for the Green Bay Packers. It's a collapsing defensive front that has allowed its 4 worst games in terms of yards before rushing contact per attempt in the last 5 weeks. The only game below their threshold of their worst games came against the Chargers' awful run game in Week 11. The Giants, last week, their 172 non-scramble rush yards allowed to them was their second most of the year. They're really, really struggling on the ground. Rachaad White coming off his second 100-yard rushing game in 3 weeks is a top 5 running back this week against the Green Bay Packers and a good DFS option. I expect the Bucs are going to give the ball to Rachaad White, who has been producing at a high level for them. This is a great week for Rachaad White in this matchup with the Green Bay Packers.
Packers on offense, Joe?
Well, the Buccaneers are a massive pass funnel defense. We saw Drake London have a huge game against the Bucs last week. We saw Jordan Love has been playing solid football. Obviously, there were some struggles on the Monday night game against the Giants with the interception. Let's keep an eye on the status of Christian Watson because it would be really, really hard to sit him in this matchup. But Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, I think have very good matchups against the Buccaneers in the event Christian Watson doesn't go. Jaden Reed, a horrible beat last week. I think like his passing yardage prop was like 31.5. He caught 8 passes for 27 yards. That is a brutal beat, but the Buccaneers, a pass funnel defense, it is a good week to be using Jordan Love if you need him this week.
Let's talk Jets and Dolphins. Both these teams are interesting. We got the Tyreek Hill ankle thing. Yep. Zach Wilson played well. What are you thinking here, Joe?
Yeah, that Dolphin defense is a different beast, though, for Zach Wilson. I'm not going to be terribly excited about him. I feel like you have to play Garrett Wilson. Zach Wilson just throws the guy the ball. And Garrett Wilson is one of the best wide receivers in all of football. I cannot imagine what this guy's numbers would be if Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback. Garrett Wilson has 76 catches for 853 yards this year. He's probably going to reach 90 catches and 1,000 yards with bottom-of-the-barrel quarterback play. So I just can't. It's shocking to me how good this guy's numbers would be if Aaron Rodgers was out there. Nonetheless, Jalen Ramsey, this Dolphin defense, going to be a tougher challenge for him. And we know the Jets aren't going to run the ball. Breece Hall had a huge game last week, but it was almost entirely through the air. At the very least, Zach Wilson checks the ball down to him. If you have Breece Hall for fantasy right now, you know what he is, Ross. You know that you need the passing game work for him to get there for you in your fantasy lineups.
We got time for one more, so let's do it. Giants and Saints. Tommy DeVito, does he factor in with the running, Joe?
The Saint defense, look, they had a good game against Bryce Young last week. It doesn't excite me all that much for their defense. Tommy DeVito, man, yeah, he's top 10 rushing yards in 4 of his 6 games this year. He's top 40 rushing yards in 2 of the 6. I think you can talk yourself into Tommy DeVito. The problem is the receiving core just isn't very good, as you well know. Wan'Dale Robinson comes out of nowhere and has 6 catches for 79 yards. Pick your poison with these receivers, right? Jalen Hyatt had the 100-yard game before the bye. Wan'Dale Robinson shows some life for the first time in a while. I'm not going to get excited about any of these receivers. What I can get excited about, though, is Saquon Barkley. Saquon's played exceptionally well of late. The Saints' run defense, not the best in the world, not the worst in the world, but Saquon Barkley, I think, he's gotten it done on the ground in most of Tommy DeVito's games, and I expect he's going to have the opportunity to do so in this game as well.
What about the Saints' offense? They're kind of a tough watch still, Joe.
Yeah, so here's what I said on Twitter last week. I said, I can't imagine anything more brain dead than the Saints starting Derek Carr this week, so I fully expect them to do it, and that's what they did. And, they're just very lucky they were playing the Panthers. Derek Carr is playing through 3 broken ribs. I mean, I'm sure he'll have a better game this week, but we've now seen him struggle 2 consecutive weeks after getting hurt in the first place. The Saints coaching staff is just clueless.
That is the voice of the great Joe Dolan at FG_Dolan on the show that's so nice. We do it twice. Got to get to the rest of the games in episode 2. Make sure you download, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm stuffed.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.